A billionaire's pen hovered over disaster, until a waitress whispered one forbidden word. A billionaire was seconds from signing away his entire empire when a quiet voice, belonging to the waitress no one noticed, told him to stop. That single moment exposed a mistake everyone else ignored and unraveled a truth big enough to shake boardrooms and rewrite lives. This is the story of how an overlooked woman changed everything. The city glimmered far below the 78th floor, its lights trembling against the glass walls like a world holding its breath. Inside the conference room, however, everything felt frozen. Every sound swallowed, every movement stiff, every face strained. Ethan Caldwell sat at the head of the long, polished table, a fountain pen balanced between his fingers, though his hand shook so much the nib quivered above the signature line. He looked nothing like the man who once commanded Wall Street with a single phone call. His tailored suit was flawless, but the sheen of sweat at his temple betrayed the storm inside him. Before him lay the bankruptcy papers, the end of Caldwell Industries, the empire he'd built from one delivery truck and a rented warehouse. His lawyers sat in a rigid line along the far side of the table, their eyes fixed on the documents the way people stare at a cliff's edge. They spoke quietly among themselves, their voices cold and efficient, their tone suggesting that this was simply the logical next step. But it wasn't logic holding Ethan still. It was fear, the kind that presses deep into a man's ribs and whispers that once he signs, nothing will ever be the same again. The air felt thick, heavy, almost damp with tension. And then, barely noticeable at first, came the soft squeak of a rolling cart. The door eased open. Jasmine Carter stepped in, slim, steady, her dark curls pulled back, wearing the faded cafe uniform of the service staff on the 23rd floor. Most people in the building never looked twice at her. She moved like a shadow around executives who treated her as part of the furniture. Today was supposed to be just another shift. Refill the coffee urns, collect empty cups, clean quietly, disappear quietly. She didn't expect to walk into history. Jasmine pushed the cart gently to the corner of the room. The lawyers ignored her. Ethan barely seemed to notice. But as she reached for the carafe, her eyes drifted, just for a moment, to the papers spread across the table. A bold number caught her attention. Then another. Her breath hitched. She tried to look away, but something in the alignment, the date, the formula, it was wrong. Not a little wrong. Fundamentally wrong. She recognized the pattern instantly. The very same debt rollover model she'd studied years ago in community college before dropping out to take care of her mother. Her heart thumped unevenly. She froze, hands trembling slightly over the cup she'd been about to set down. She shouldn't be looking. She shouldn't say a word. A waitress had no place in a billionaire's crisis. But the number screamed at her. Ethan lifted the pen, drawing in a slow breath as if preparing for the final blow. Every lawyer leaned forward in anticipation. "Sir?" Jasmine whispered. No one turned. Her own voice startled her, thin, frightened, but firm enough that it escaped the corner of the room. She swallowed and tried again, louder this time. "Sir, please, please don't sign that." The tip of Ethan's pen stopped mid-air. The lawyers snapped their heads toward her, annoyance flaring instantly. One of them stood abruptly. "Ma'am, this is a confidential meeting. You need to leave, now." Jasmine's knees almost buckled under the weight of every eye in the room, but her gaze stayed locked on the document. She didn't move toward the door. She didn't step back either. The number pulsed in her mind like a siren. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling but refusing to break. "I don't mean to interrupt, but there's something wrong on page 3. The debt maturity line. It's not calculated right." A stunned silence followed. Ethan slowly set the pen down. For the first time since she entered, he truly looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her existence for the first time. Behind her uniform, behind her soft voice, behind the hesitance, he sensed certainty. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. Jasmine swallowed hard. "The numbers don't match. I think—" She paused, breath catching. "I think you're being pushed into bankruptcy too early." The lawyers erupted in overlapping protests, their voices urgent, irritated, dismissive. "She doesn't know what she's saying. This is absurd. Security should remove her immediately." But Ethan raised a hand, silencing them. His eyes never left Jasmine's. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Would a waitress see something my entire financial team missed?" Jasmine's pulse hammered in her ears. She didn't know the answer. All she knew was that if she walked out that door now, she would carry the guilt forever. And somewhere inside Ethan Caldwell, a man moments away from signing away everything, something shifted. Not hope exactly, but a pause, a question, a possibility. He reached slowly for the page she'd pointed out, and the room, once frozen in dread, now held a different kind of tension, because a waitress had dared to stop a billionaire's pen, and nobody knew why. Yet. The conference room stayed unnervingly still, as if the air itself was trying to understand what had just happened. Jasmine could feel her heartbeat in her throat, loud enough she wondered if the walls could hear it. Ethan held the papers in both hands now, scanning the line she had pointed out, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of confusion and something dangerously close to alarm. Around him, the lawyers shifted in their expensive suits, irritation rippling through them like heat rising from asphalt. "Mr. Caldwell," the lead attorney insisted, stepping forward, "we cannot allow this meeting to be derailed by—" He hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't sound as condescending as the one he wanted to use. "By someone who isn't authorized to participate." Jasmine lowered her gaze, feeling the sting of his tone cut straight through her. She knew that voice. She'd heard it from supervisors, from customers, from people who assumed her place in the world before she even opened her mouth. But she drew a slow breath, steadying herself, refusing to take a step back. "I'm not trying to participate," she said softly. "I just didn't want you to sign something that was wrong." Her hands twisted together in front of her apron without her noticing. She wished they would stop shaking. She wished she had stayed silent. She wished— No, part of her was glad she spoke, even if the room seemed ready to swallow her for it. Ethan ignored the lawyers entirely. He leaned closer over the paper, running a thumb along the column of numbers. His breath hitched, not much, just a small break in rhythm, but enough to make every attorney in the room stiffen. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to the lead lawyer. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Is this debt listed as matured?" "It shouldn't be. Not yet." The attorney blinked twice, his expression flickering with uncertainty, before settling back into polished confidence. "It was presented to us as imminent, yes. Given current market pressures, that wasn't my question." The attorney's jaw tightened. Across the room, Jasmine felt the tension building again. But now it wasn't aimed at her. It was spreading outward, unsettling the professionals who had seemed so sure of themselves moments earlier. "I want this recalculated," Ethan said. "Now." "Sir," another attorney objected, "this could delay filing. That exposes you to additional—" "I said now." His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut straight through the room. One by one, the lawyers reached for their tablets and laptops with stiff hands. A few exchanged silent glances, the kind that carried questions no one dared speak aloud. Jasmine stood motionless in the corner, unsure whether she should leave or stay, unsure whether she would be escorted out or thanked or fired. She felt painfully exposed, as if all her insecurities, her uniform, her job, her background, were being placed under a microscope. Then Ethan looked straight at her. "Miss, I'm sorry. I don't know your name." She straightened slightly. Jasmine Carter." "Miss Carter," he said slowly. "Can you tell me exactly what you noticed?" The attorney nearest him nearly choked. "Sir, with respect, she is a waitress." That word again, like a lid being slammed over her head. Jasmine lowered her gaze, but Ethan's voice stopped her before her stare could fall all the way to the ground. "And she may have just saved me from signing a catastrophic error." Silence. This time, no one dared interrupt. Jasmine lifted her eyes again, surprised to find Ethan watching her. Not impatiently, not dismissively, but with an odd mixture of curiosity and respect? Or maybe desperation. She wasn't sure. His life might be collapsing around him, and she had briefly become the one stable thing in the room. Jasmine swallowed. "Back when I studied accounting, we learned about rollover debt structures. And that line on page 3, it didn't match the usual timelines. It looked like someone accelerated the maturity date when it shouldn't have been." "You studied accounting?" one of the attorneys blurted out, unable to hide his disbelief. She didn't answer him. She kept her eyes on Ethan. He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "You're saying this isn't just a typo?" "No," Jasmine said. "It's not." He sat back in his chair, rubbing his forehead like he was trying to piece together a puzzle whose picture changed every time he blinked. The room had shifted around them. Power no longer sat with the lawyers, but hovered somewhere between Ethan's questioning stare and Jasmine's trembling certainty. Finally, he set the papers down and turned to his team. "Review every debt schedule, every conversion, every supplemental note." His voice deepened. "We're not filing anything until I understand what's been put in front of me." The lead attorney hesitated. "Mr. Caldwell, that could take hours." "Then start now." Computers snapped open. Fingers scrambled across keyboards. The room buzzed with frantic energy, like bees suddenly shaken from a nest. Jasmine stood there, still gripping the handle of the coffee cart, unsure what to do with her hands or her breath. She'd never imagined a billionaire would pause his world because of something she said. She'd never imagined anyone in a room like this would listen to her at all. Ethan leaned back in his chair and exhaled, his eyes drifting toward the skyline again. The lights of Manhattan flickered on the glass like stars underwater. He looked smaller somehow, still powerful, still composed, but human. Then his gaze slid back to Jasmine. "You changed something tonight," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. I just didn't want you to sign something wrong," she whispered. "That's all." Ethan studied her for a long moment, like he was measuring a truth he had forgotten how to believe in. "Miss Carter," he said at last, "I need you to stay close. There may be more here than any of us realized." The lawyers stiffened again, but no one dared argue. Jasmine's world felt suddenly too large and too small all at once. She didn't know if she had just stepped into trouble, or destiny, or both. All she knew was that she was no longer invisible, and when the attorneys finally confirmed that something truly was off, that her instincts had been right, every head in the room turned toward her, but none with more weight than Ethan's. "Find her," he murmured to his assistant, though she was still standing in plain sight. "I want Miss Carter brought back." The message was clear. Whatever happened next, she was now part of it. Jasmine stepped out of the conference room as though emerging from a tunnel, her heartbeat still loud in her ears. The hallway outside was bright with fluorescent lighting and humming with distant office noise, yet everything felt muted, as if she were walking underwater. A few executives passed her, glancing without really seeing her, the way people glance at someone carrying cleaning supplies or pushing a service cart. She had lived inside that kind of invisibility for years, But now, after what had just happened, the invisibility felt strangely heavy, like a coat she no longer wanted to wear. She pressed the elevator button and folded her arms, trying to quiet the tremor in her hands. As the door slid open, she stepped inside and leaned against the mirrored wall. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, faded uniform, curls pulled back too tightly. A woman who had learned to tuck herself into corners so she wouldn't be in anyone's way. She barely recognized the person who had dared to interrupt a billionaire. The elevator began its descent, and with each passing floor, memories flickered like film frames in her mind. She saw the cramped apartment in Brooklyn where she grew up, the one with peeling paint and a draft that whistled through the cracked window in winter. She saw herself as a teenager standing in the doorway, watching her mother finish another late shift, shoes in her hands because her feet hurt too much to keep them on. She saw her mother smile, tired but warm, telling her, "Baby, use your mind. Numbers don't lie. They'll take care of you if you understand them." Jasmine had believed her. She had taken every community class she could find: accounting, finance basics, anything that offered a textbook and a whiteboard. She remembered her pride the day she earned a small scholarship to continue her studies. She remembered late nights in the library with empty vending machine wrappers and dreams bigger than anything she'd ever told a soul. And then her mother collapsed at work. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the lobby, but Jasmine didn't step out. She stayed inside, letting the doors close again. She needed a moment alone. Her mind pulled her back into the past. She remembered how the hospital bills had come all at once. Letters with red stamps shouting overdue, final notice, immediate payment required. She remembered sitting in a cold plastic chair, a professor calling to ask if she could still finish the semester. Jasmine had looked at her mother sleeping peacefully beneath the dim hospital lights and said, "I'll come back when things settle." Things never settled. She traded classes for shifts, morning, night, double shifts when the diner needed her. Numbers faded into the background of her life until they became something she noticed only out of habit, on receipts, on price tags, on customers' forgotten invoices. She stopped speaking up when she spotted mistakes because the world rarely cared what a waitress had to say. Yet today, she had spoken. Her throat tightened. Had she made a fool of herself? Had she misread something? Had she just destroyed her job, her reputation, the fragile stability she'd worked so hard to build? The elevator bell rang again, reminding her she hadn't moved. She straightened, walked out into the lobby, and headed toward the staff hallway. As she approached the service corridor, she noticed Carlos, the building's security guard, leaning against the wall with a cup of coffee. He gave her a nod, the friendly kind shared between two people who worked in the shadows of a building filled with people who didn't notice them. "Long night?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Longer than usual." He tilted his head, studying her. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. She didn't know what she was, only that her world was shifting in ways she couldn't yet understand. When she finally reached the cafe's tiny break room, she sank into a worn chair. Her legs felt heavy, her thoughts heavier. Her apron smelled faintly of coffee grounds and dish soap, scents that usually grounded her. But tonight, they felt like reminders of a life she wasn't sure fit anymore. She rested her forehead against her hands and exhaled shakily. "Lord, please tell me I didn't mess up," she whispered. But beneath her fear was a small, persistent spark, one she hadn't felt in years, a spark that whispered, "You did the right thing." She tried to silence it, but it glowed stubbornly in the dark. Her phone buzzed against the table. She jumped, startled. The screen flashed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, her breath caught in her chest. Then she opened it. "Miss Carter, please return to the 78th floor. Mr. Caldwell would like to see you immediately." Her pulse stumbled. She read the words again, slower this time, trying to make sense of them. Ethan Caldwell wanted to see her? Again? Fear prickled at the back of her neck. Maybe he'd discovered she was wrong. Maybe the lawyers convinced him she was a nuisance. Maybe she was about to be escorted out of the building for good. Jasmine stood, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the fluorescent lights too harsh. But she drew in one long breath, steadying herself the way her mother had taught her years ago. Inhale, hold, release. She stepped out of the break room and began walking down the corridor, her footsteps echoing faintly. Somewhere high above the city, a billionaire waited for her, and she had no idea what he would say. Jasmine stepped into the elevator again, this time with her pulse fluttering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The shiny steel doors slid shut behind her, sealing her in with a soft hiss. As the elevator began to rise, floor numbers blinking steadily upward, she felt the strange sensation of the world pulling away from her, the noise of the lobby fading, the air growing stiller, the lights harsher. The 78th floor felt impossibly far, like she was rising into someone else's life, not her own. When the doors finally opened, the hallway outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel amplified. Her footsteps echoed lightly along the polished wood floors as she approached the conference suite. She expected to be stopped. She expected a guard, a lawyer, anyone to send her back down where she belonged. No one did. She stood at the doorway of an adjoining meeting room, a smaller one, more intimate, with warm lamp lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Manhattan glowed outside, a tapestry of neon and streetlights stretching toward the horizon. Ethan Caldwell stood near the window with his back to her, hands in his pockets, shoulders sloping under weight she couldn't yet understand. He looked older from behind, as if the last hour had aged him 10 years. An assistant motioned Jasmine inside and closed the door, leaving her alone with him. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan turned slowly, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not irritation, not even confusion. It was closer to searching, as if he were trying to understand how the same world that nearly destroyed him had allowed this woman to walk into the room at exactly the right moment. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "please, sit." He gestured toward the chair across from him. She hesitated, unused to being invited to sit anywhere near a billionaire, let alone opposite him. Finally, she lowered herself into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan took a seat across the table but leaned forward, forearms resting on the edge, making himself smaller somehow, less intimidating, more human. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "But first, I need to understand something. How did you see that error?" Jasmine swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to study accounting, before my mom got sick. I had to drop out, but I kept noticing numbers, patterns. Sometimes I don't even try. It just happens." He nodded slowly, absorbing each word, the silence stretching softly between them. "You know," he said, "I've spent months surrounded by analysts, advisors, consultants, people who come with credentials and long resumes, people who speak in formulas and projections." He paused. "But none of them saw what you did. Not one." Jasmine lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to interfere, sir." "You saved me," he said quietly. "Don't apologize for that." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked up again, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "I didn't save you," she murmured. "I just pointed at something wrong." "Miss Carter," he replied, "sometimes the smallest truth spoken by the quietest voice is what keeps someone from falling off a cliff." His voice softened, as if he wasn't speaking just about the papers. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her in the dim, warm light of the room. The city reflected across the glass behind him, a mosaic of colors shimmering like waves. "Do you know what they call people like you in my world?" he asked. She shook her head. "Outliers. The ones who aren't supposed to be in the room but end up seeing the whole picture more clearly than the people who are." He paused. "I don't want to underestimate that ever again." Jasmine's chest tightened, unsure how to hold the weight of his words. "You're probably wondering why I asked you to come back," he continued. She nodded faintly. He reached for the stack of papers beside him and slid them across the table. They were the same documents from earlier, except now they were marked with red highlights, sticky notes, timestamps, circles, signs of chaos and revelation. "There's more we need to review," he said, "and I want you in the room when we do." Jasmine's breath caught. "Sir, I'm just a waitress." "No," he said evenly. "You are someone with sharp instincts, someone who sees truth in numbers, someone who had the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent." His eyes held hers. "That isn't just anything." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She didn't know how to explain the swirl inside her. Fear, disbelief, the faint burn of hope. "I won't pressure you," Ethan added. "If you want to walk away from this, I'll respect it. But I'm asking, Miss Carter, would you help me understand what else might be wrong here?" For a moment, the room felt impossibly still. Only the hum of the city far below broke the silence. Jasmine thought of her mother, of late nights studying with second-hand textbooks, of the feeling she once had, that maybe she was meant for something more than people let her believe. She looked at the papers, then at Ethan. "I can try," she said softly. He exhaled, a sound of relief rather than triumph. "Thank you." As Jasmine stood to leave, Ethan added quietly, "Miss Carter?" She turned. "When you walked into that room tonight," he said, "every person in there saw you as invisible, but you weren't." He paused. "You changed the direction of my life in 5 seconds." Her throat tightened, and she nodded without speaking. Outside the room, the hallway felt different this time. Not brighter, not louder, but open, as if a door she never knew existed had cracked ajar. She walked toward the elevator, unaware that behind the quiet glass walls, people were already whispering, already wondering, already unsettled by the idea that a waitress had seen what they had not. And far below, Manhattan pulsed with life, unaware that its towering skyline had just tilted ever so slightly, reshaped by the courage of someone the world rarely bothered to notice. By the next morning, the sky over the city carried a pale gray tint, the kind that made skyscrapers look taller, sharper, more unforgiving. Jasmine arrived at the Caldwell Industries Tower early, her breath visible in the chill of dawn, her nerves coiled tight as she stepped through the revolving glass doors. She shouldn't have been nervous. She wasn't in trouble, at least as far as she knew. But every instinct in her whispered that she was crossing into a world that did not want her in it. She smoothed the front of her uniform as she walked toward the service elevators, but halfway there, a young assistant intercepted her with a polite nod and a message she wasn't prepared for. "Mr. Caldwell would like you to join the review session on the 78th floor. Not the cafe, not the break room, the 78th floor. Jasmine hesitated, stunned. "Me? Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. He asked for you by name." She felt the world tilt again. The private elevator ride was silent. Her own reflection in the mirrored wall looked like a stranger, eyes wide, shoulders stiff, hands fidgeting with a loose thread at the hem of her sleeve. Her uniform suddenly felt like a costume in the wrong play. When the doors opened, she stepped into a hallway filled with the scent of polished wood, lemon oil, and money. Quiet, expensive money. The assistant guided her toward the main conference room. The closer they got, the louder the hum of voices became. Not friendly chatter, but crisp, pressured conversations tinged with irritation. The moment Jasmine entered, those voices stopped. Every lawyer at the long, glossy table looked up, their expressions flickering, from annoyance to disbelief to something colder. The room wasn't loud, yet the silence felt deafening. Ethan stood near the head of the table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a sign he'd been working since dawn. When he saw her, he gave a small nod, not a grand gesture, but enough to cut through the tension. "Good. You're here. Take a seat." A seat, not a corner, not a place by the wall. He pointed to the chair beside him. Jasmine froze. "Sir, I can stand. I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine," Ethan said quietly, but not unkindly. "I asked you to sit." The lawyers exchanged glances, silent protests passing between them. As Jasmine lowered herself into the chair, she felt heat crawl up her neck. The wood was smooth under her palms, the leather cushion soft, but she could feel the discomfort radiating from every person in the room. She didn't belong here. They agreed on that much, and their eyes said it without sound. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near documents worth billions. But Ethan didn't seem to care. He handed her the stack of printed pages from last night. "We found several inconsistencies after your observation. Today, I want us to review everything, together." A lawyer cleared his throat sharply. "Mr. Caldwell, with all respect, this is highly irregular." "Good," Ethan replied, "because what we've been doing so far hasn't worked." A muscle tightened in the lawyer's jaw. Across the table sat Lucas Hargrove, the CFO, sharp-featured, perfectly groomed, with a calmness that felt too controlled. He had the air of a man used to being the smartest person in the room. He sat back in his chair, arms folded, observing Jasmine with an unreadable expression. When Ethan began reviewing the flagged items, Jasmine leaned forward, scanning the numbers. She hesitated before speaking. "Sir, this line here, this depreciation rate, it doesn't match the acquisition date. It should be lower." Lucas's head lifted slightly, though his face remained unreadable. Another attorney leaned forward, irritated. "Ms. Carter, depreciation models are complicated. Perhaps you're misunderstanding—" Ethan cut him off. "Explain the discrepancy then." The attorney stiffened. "Well, I'd need more time to review, so she's not wrong," Ethan said. Jasmine swallowed as heat flushed her cheeks. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She wasn't trying to rise above anyone. She was simply reading numbers. Numbers she'd always trusted more than people. But then she noticed Lucas watching her, not with the skepticism she expected, but with something sharper. Calculation. Unease. And in his eyes, for the briefest moment, a flicker of something like panic. Ethan moved on, flipping pages rapidly. "What about this one?" Jasmine hesitated. "Sir, it looks like a liability was consolidated before the subsidiary transfer took effect. That isn't standard practice. It inflates the projected losses," Ethan finished, eyebrows lifting. She nodded lightly. Lucas shifted. Ethan turned to him. "Lucas, your department handled these files. Can you explain these adjustments?" Lucas kept his eyes on the papers, his voice even. "They were made according to the models provided by our senior analysts." "Which analysts?" Ethan pressed. Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped a finger on the table. Once, twice, a steady, controlled rhythm. Then he looked up at Jasmine, his eyes calm but cold. "With respect," he said, "we should not be basing financial decisions on the interpretations of someone who—" He paused, his gaze flicking to her uniform. "Serves coffee." The words hit her like a shove. She felt them in her chest, behind her ribs, between memories of every time someone underestimated her because of her job, her skin, her silence. Ethan stiffened. The room went still. "Lucas," he said quietly, dangerously, "she has identified 2 errors your entire team missed. Errors that could have destroyed this company." Lucas leaned back, shoulders relaxed, voice smooth. "And I'm sure she believes she's correct. But this is complex work, sir. She may be seeing patterns that aren't there." But Jasmine wasn't guessing. She felt the truth of the numbers the way she felt heat from a stovetop, instinctively, immediately, with certainty. Ethan turned to her. "Jasmine, anything else you see?" For a second, she didn't answer. Her throat felt tight. She didn't want to speak. She didn't want to draw more fire toward herself. But she owed the truth more than she owed her fear. "Yes," she said softly. "There's something else." She pointed at another line. Lucas's jaw flexed. The room changed. Subtle, but real. A shift in tension. A shift in attention. And for the first time, Jasmine realized something she had not understood until this moment. Someone in this room did not want the truth found. And whoever that someone was, they had noticed her. Far too clearly. By the time Jasmine left the 78th floor, the sun had slipped behind a bank of clouds, casting Manhattan in the kind of gray light that made every street look colder, every face more distant. She walked out of the tower with her shoulders tight and her breath shallow, replaying every moment from the meeting, every stare, every raised eyebrow, every word Lucas had thrown like a quiet, calculated insult. The wind outside cut through her uniform. She clutched the thin fabric against herself as she headed toward the subway entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. Moments earlier, she had sat beside a billionaire. Now she was just another tired worker blending into the crowd. The contrast was dizzying. When she reached her neighborhood in Brooklyn, rows of aging brick buildings, flickering streetlights, sidewalks cracked from decades of harsh winters, the tension in her chest loosened just a little. This place wasn't pretty, but it was familiar. Kids rode bikes down the block, weaving between parked cars. Someone grilled chicken on a small metal drum near the corner store, the smoke drifting through the air in thin blue ribbons. A bus hissed to a stop nearby, letting out a handful of weary passengers. Jasmine crossed the street carefully, avoiding a puddle that reflected the pale orange glow of a street lamp. Halfway home, she heard a faint grunt, an older man struggling with a cart full of groceries. The wheels were crooked, catching on every crack in the pavement. She didn't think twice. "Let me help you with that," she said gently. The man looked up, surprised, his gray eyebrows lifting. "You sure? It's heavy, sweetheart." "It's okay. I've lifted worse at the cafe," she replied with a small smile. Together they steadied the cart and guided it toward his building. He thanked her 3 times before she continued on her way. A few doors down, a small boy tripped over a loose shoelace, dropping a comic book that skidded across the sidewalk. Jasmine knelt instantly, picked it up, brushed the dirt off the cover, and handed it back. "Careful," she said. "Superheroes need steady feet." The boy grinned, showing a missing front tooth before sprinting back to his friends. It was small things, quiet kindnesses that cost nothing, but they were part of her. They always had been, even on days when the world made her feel invisible. By the time she reached her building, rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then steadily, tapping against the metal awning like fingertips. She pushed open the door and climbed the narrow stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent and fried onions from a neighbor's kitchen. Inside the apartment, her mother sat in her worn recliner near the window, knitting a scarf in slow, careful motions. She looked up as Jasmine entered, her eyes warm even before she spoke. "You're home later than usual," her mother said. "Everything all right?" Jasmine hesitated before answering. She set her bag down and slipped out of her damp shoes, trying to calm the storm inside her long enough to form words. "Something happened at work today," she said softly. Her mother's hands paused mid-stitch. "Good or bad?" "I don't know yet." Jasmine sat on the edge of the couch. "I saw something in a document. Something that didn't make sense. And I spoke up." Her mother smiled faintly. "That sounds like you." "It made a lot of people angry," Jasmine added. "People who run the company. People who think I shouldn't notice anything." She rubbed her palms together, trying not to let her mother see her trembling. "I'm scared I might have messed everything up." Her mother set down her knitting and reached for her daughter's hand. Her fingers were warm, familiar, steady. "Baby," she said gently, "doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world. But your conscience, your heart, knows the truth before anything else." Jasmine's eyes stung. She blinked hard, inhaling shakily. "What if I lose my job over this?" she whispered. "Then you lose it doing something honest," her mother replied. "And there's nothing wrong with that." The words settled into Jasmine's chest like a soft weight, not heavy enough to crush her, but heavy enough to remind her she was still standing. She got up to heat a pot of soup, letting the steam fog the small kitchen window. The hum of the refrigerator blended with the soft patter of rain outside. This was her real world, simple, imperfect, full of struggle but also full of tiny moments of grace. After dinner, she sat by the window alone, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The city lights blurred in the reflection, turning the street below into a shimmering mosaic. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up with cautious fingers. The sender was Ethan. "Jasmine, if you're willing, I need your help tomorrow. We're going to review everything. Your instincts mattered today." She let the message sit there for a long moment. A billionaire had asked for her help. A man with influence, with power, with the entire world watching him, had stopped everything because of her voice. Her voice, she closed her eyes. Fear still lingered, but hope pushed its way in beside it. She typed a reply with steady, deliberate hands. "I'll be there." And as she set the phone down, she didn't know what awaited her on the 78th floor. Only that she would walk into it with her eyes open, and she would not shrink. When Jasmine arrived at Caldwell Industries the next morning, the city was wrapped in a thin veil of fog, softening edges and muting colors, the way the world looks just before something important happens. The tower loomed above her like a silent judge. She paused for a moment at the base of the steps, clutching the strap of her bag, gathering the courage that had carried her through more difficult days than she cared to count. Inside, the lobby buzzed with early morning tension. Quiet, clipped conversations, footsteps that hurried without running, the faint metallic echo of elevators opening and closing. Jasmine crossed the polished stone floor, her reflection blurring beneath her as she walked. The receptionist gave her a strange, curious look. She wasn't used to seeing Jasmine head toward the private elevators, but she didn't question her. As the doors slid shut, Jasmine exhaled slowly and let her shoulders drop for the length of the ride. She told herself she belonged here because Ethan had asked for her, because she had seen something no one else had, because the truth did not care about uniforms. The elevator chimed softly when she reached the 78th floor. She stepped out into a hallway, bright with natural light spilling through tall glass panels. It felt like walking into a different world, one that wasn't hers but had somehow opened a door for her to enter. When she reached the conference room, the tension inside hit her like a wave. Lawyers lined both sides of the table, laptops open, papers strewn across the glossy wood surface. Analysts clustered in corners, whispering in urgent tones. Ethan stood near the head of the table, jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, but razor sharp, like a man who'd been forced awake by a looming disaster. And then she saw him. Lucas Hargrove. He sat at the far end of the table, unbothered posture, legs crossed, one hand resting casually against his jaw as he watched the room. His expensive suit looked freshly pressed, his dark hair perfectly in place. He carried the calm confidence of someone who believed he was in control, even when the ground beneath him was shifting. When Jasmine entered, several people paused their work to stare, not out of malice, out of confusion. Some murmured her name under their breath. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to matter. But Ethan straightened when he saw her. "Good morning, Jasmine," he said. "Come sit." Her pulse jumped. He didn't gesture to the side of the room. He pointed to the empty chair right beside him. Lucas's eyes flicked toward her. Narrow, assessing, unreadable. Jasmine took her seat quietly, placing her bag on the floor. The leather chair felt too soft beneath her, as if it belonged to someone braver. Ethan tapped the stack of files in front of them. "We found additional inconsistencies last night," he said, "and I want to go through them with you." The lead attorney cleared his throat. "With all due respect, sir, Ms. Carter is not part of the certified review team. Involving her further may—" Ethan cut him off. "She saw what none of you did. She stays." Jasmine stared at the documents, fighting back the heat rising in her cheeks. She wasn't used to being defended, especially not by someone like Ethan Caldwell. He pushed the first set of papers toward her. Rows of transactions, dates, calculations, familiar shapes she could read like a second language. "This one here," Ethan said, tapping a highlighted number. "Do you notice anything?" She leaned closer, tracing the line with her eyes. The figures formed a pattern she didn't expect. Too neat, too clean, too perfectly aligned. It looked intentional. "This depreciation curve," she whispered, "should taper, not sharpen." "What does that mean?" an analyst asked. "That it's been forced," Jasmine said, "artificially." Lucas shifted slightly, just enough that Jasmine noticed. Ethan noticed too. "And this one?" Ethan slid another page forward. She scanned the rows of vendor payments. Something tugged at the back of her mind. A faint recognition. A memory. She looked again, slower. A vendor name stood out. A maintenance firm she'd seen earlier in another document. But there, the company had listed no physical address. Here, the name appeared in dozens of transactions for repairs she was certain never happened. Her breath hitched. "Sir," she said, pointing at the line, "this is wrong. This company, it isn't real." Silence fell across the table. "What do you mean?" the attorney asked stiffly. "There's no service report number," she explained. "No matching invoice timestamp. And this part here, maintenance was billed for a property that wasn't even in operation that month." Ethan's jaw clenched. He turned toward Lucas, eyes sharp. "This went through your department." Lucas didn't blink. "Many smaller payments are automated through the vendor system. It's not uncommon for numbers to appear unusual at first glance." "But they're not unusual," Jasmine said quietly. "They're patterned." Ethan leaned in. "Patterned how?" She swallowed, gathering her courage. "Enough to create inflated losses. Enough to make the company look weaker than it actually is. Enough to justify bankruptcy." The words landed like a weight dropped onto the table. A low murmur spread among the lawyers. Ethan stared at the document as if seeing it for the first time. Then he turned back to Lucas. "Explain it." Lucas clasped his hands calmly. "I will need more time to investigate. It could simply be clerical mismanagement." "Clerical mismanagement doesn't repeat itself across 4 quarters, Ethan shot back. His voice was controlled, but the quiet anger underneath was unmistakable. "And it certainly doesn't hide inside empty shell vendors." Lucas's polite expression didn't falter, but something in his eyes hardened. Sir, with all due respect, are we now taking the lead of someone who spent last night refilling our coffee? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The insult was deliberate, and it echoed through the room. Jasmine felt the sting behind her ribs. Ethan stood up slowly. Say that again. Lucas stayed seated, his posture relaxed. This is complex financial analysis. I worry she may be misunderstanding things beyond her experience. The room tightened. Jasmine lowered her gaze, but when Ethan spoke again, his voice was steady as steel. She is the only person in this room who has not misunderstood anything. Lucas's jaw tensed. Ethan looked around the table. We're reopening every transaction from the last 3 years. All of them. And if these patterns continue, this isn't negligence. He paused. It's manipulation. A chill swept the room. Jasmine stared at the papers, pulse drumming, realizing what she had stumbled into. This wasn't about a miscalculation. This wasn't about a careless oversight. Someone had been reshaping the company's financial heartbeat from the inside. And now Ethan knew it. Now they all knew it. As the meeting descended into scrambling urgency, attorneys arguing, analysts typing rapidly, documents sliding across the table, Jasmine felt the weight settle in her chest. She hadn't just pointed out errors, she had uncovered the first thread of something far darker. And somewhere across the table, Lucas watched her with silent warning in his eyes, a warning she could no longer ignore. The tension inside the 78th floor conference room thickened as the hours dragged on. Documents piled higher, tempers thinned, and the clatter of keyboards and rustling pages became a relentless soundtrack beneath the rising anxiety. Outside, the Manhattan skyline stretched under a pale winter sun, but inside the air felt dimmer, charged with suspicion, fear, and the weight of truths that did not want to be uncovered. Jasmine sat quietly beside Ethan, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to look smaller than she felt. She wasn't used to these rooms with their leather chairs and sweeping views. She wasn't used to voices that carried power, or decisions that shook hundreds of lives. And yet, impossibly, she had become part of it. Every time her eyes drifted across the table, she felt Lucas's gaze. Calm, composed, unreadable. It felt like he was studying her the way a chess player studies an unexpected move, one that could threaten an entire strategy. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the table. Not hurried, not nervous, just deliberate. It made her skin prickle. Let's move on, Ethan said, pushing aside another sheet. He looked tired, deeper lines etched along his forehead, a tightness around his mouth. But his voice remained steady, determined. We need clarity on these quarterly losses. Lucas adjusted his tie, expression smooth. I already told you, sir. The data came from the analytics team. If there were errors, they were unintentional. One error, Ethan said calmly. Maybe. 2 errors possible. But what we're seeing, he lifted the stack Jasmine had marked. This is a pattern. The room stilled. Ethan turned to Jasmine. Show them the discrepancies. Her stomach tightened. She wasn't afraid of the numbers. They made more sense than people ever did. But speaking in front of these executives felt like stepping onto thin ice. Still, she reached for the documents. This revenue variance here, she began, doesn't match market conditions from last year, and this maintenance loss, this one, was recorded during a quarter where there were no open operations at that site. One of the lawyers frowned. How do you know that? She looked at him softly, but firmly. Because it says so in your own internal records. Section 14, page 6. The lawyer blinked, thrown. Ethan nodded as if confirming her point to himself. Go on. Jasmine continued, flipping to the next page. Her fingers stopped at a line she had circled earlier. This is the one that concerns me most. Lucas's eyes sharpened. It lists a penalty fee paid to a supplier, but the timestamp shows it was issued before the contract was even finalized. A quiet gasp escaped someone down the table. Jasmine didn't look up. That means the system recorded an expense for an agreement that didn't exist yet. Ethan's voice dropped. Which means the financial picture was being distorted on purpose. Lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Someone scribbled notes frantically. Another whispered into a phone pressed low to his lap. The room's energy shifted again, no longer just tense but volatile, like something fragile was beginning to crack. Finally, Lucas uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His tone remained calm, but the air around him seemed to cool. "With respect," he said, eyes cutting toward Jasmine, "you're making assumptions about processes you don't understand. Large-scale financial operations often contain delays, overlaps, clerical errors. Interpreting them without proper background can lead to misguided conclusions." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting she fabricated these inconsistencies?" Lucas didn't blink. "I'm suggesting she may be seeing what she wants to see. It happens." A sharp ache bloomed behind Jasmine's ribs. She had fought her whole life to be seen accurately, for people to understand her mind, her work ethic, her heart. And yet here she was, being dismissed again, as if she were a child misreading homework. But before she could respond, Ethan spoke. "No," he said, voice firm. "She sees them because they're there." Lucas's mouth tightened. Ethan stood slowly, pushing his chair back. His expression was calm, but a quiet fire burned beneath it. "Lucas, these documents came from your department. You signed off on them. Whether it was negligence or intention, I need answers." Lucas folded his arms. "And I will provide them after I reviewed—" "No," Ethan interrupted. "You'll provide them now." Silence stretched. For the first time, Lucas's gaze flickered. Not much. Not enough for most to notice, but Jasmine saw it clearly. A small, sharp crack in his composure. He stood abruptly. "I won't stay here and be interrogated alongside." His eyes landed on Jasmine again. The insult unspoken, but unmistakable. "This isn't professional protocol." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low but unyielding. "Lucas, sit down." Lucas's jaw flexed. "No." The room inhaled. He gathered his tablet, slipped it into a sleek leather case, and straightened his suit jacket. For a moment he looked poised, dignified, untouchable, as if he were the one making the decisions today. But then he spoke again, turning his head just enough that his voice aimed at Jasmine like a cold finger against her spine. "You should be careful what you involve yourself in." Every muscle in Jasmine's body tightened. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, not one that could be reported or proved, but it slid beneath her skin with chilling precision. Ethan stepped between them. "Lucas, that's enough." Lucas didn't respond. He simply walked toward the door. But just before he exited, he paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at the room, his expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said. "All of you." Then the door closed softly behind him, leaving a vacuum of silence in his wake. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We're not done. Pull every financial record for the last 3 years. I want full transparency." Lawyers moved instantly, gathering documents, issuing orders. Analysts scrambled for laptops. The room erupted into motion. And Jasmine sat very still, heart pounding, Lucas's warning echoing through her mind. "Be careful what you involve yourself in." She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted any of it. But now that she'd stepped into the truth, she couldn't walk away. Not when the truth was calling her louder than fear ever could. That evening, the city's cold wind wrapped around Jasmine the moment she stepped out of Caldwell Tower. The sky had darkened into deep blue, streaked with the glow of street lamps and headlights reflecting off the damp sidewalks. Manhattan felt different tonight. Not bustling, not indifferent, but strangely watchful, as if the city itself sensed the shift happening in the glass tower above its streets. Her steps were slow as she walked toward the subway entrance. Voices from the morning replayed in her mind. Lucas's warning, the lawyer's skepticism, Ethan's unexpected defense. Each word felt like a stone added to a weight she didn't know how to carry. She reached the subway platform, the hum of incoming trains echoing through the tiled chamber. People stood in clusters, office workers scrolling through their phones, teenagers laughing loudly, a street musician plucking soft chords on a guitar. Jasmine stayed near a pillar, arms wrapped around herself, the cold seeping through her sleeves. Something felt off. She tried to ignore it at first, telling herself it was just nerves. But as she boarded the train and grabbed hold of the metal pole, she felt a faint prickling at the back of her neck, a sense that someone was watching her. She glanced around subtly, the tired mother rocking a toddler, the businessman tapping through emails, the elderly woman knitting, but no one seemed out of place. Still, the feeling clung to her like smoke. When she stepped off the train near her neighborhood, the streets were quieter than usual. Her sneakers brushed against bits of broken leaves scattered across the sidewalk. The far-off siren of an ambulance cut through the stillness for a moment, then faded into the distance. Jasmine walked faster, glancing behind her even though she saw nothing. The shadows felt longer tonight, the alleys darker, the hum of the streetlights harsher. By the time she reached her apartment building, her chest felt tight. Inside, the hall light flickered, a familiar stutter that maintenance never seemed to fix. She went straight to the living room, where her mother sat watching the evening news on a small TV that made a faint buzzing sound. "You're home late," her mother said gently, turning down the volume. "You look tired, baby." Jasmine forced a smile and sank onto the couch beside her. "Long day. Just a lot." Her mother turned toward her fully, studying her face the way only a mother can, seeing past the surface. "Something's weighing you down." The words were simple, but they cracked something inside Jasmine. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, fingers laced together. "I think I'm in the middle of something big," she whispered. "Something dangerous, maybe. And I don't know if I'm supposed to keep going or walk away." Her mother's hand found her back, warm and steady. "Did you do something wrong?" "No," Jasmine breathed. "I told the truth." "Then don't let fear drown your courage," her mother said. "Fear will tell you to run. Truth will tell you to stand." Jasmine blinked through the sting in her eyes. Her mother always had a way of saying exactly what she needed to hear, even when the world felt too heavy. After dinner, Jasmine tidied the kitchen, letting the smooth rhythm of washing dishes calm her mind. But as she moved around the small apartment, that uneasy feeling returned, as if someone had whispered her name just behind her shoulder. She shook it off. By the time she slipped into bed, exhaustion pulled her under quickly. But sleep didn't bring rest. It brought flashes of memories and numbers and Lucas's cold stare. A loud noise startled her awake hours later. Her heart pounded as she sat upright, listening. The apartment was silent, just her imagination. She lay back down and forced her eyes shut. The next morning arrived with gray light spilling through the window blinds. Jasmine dressed quietly, pulling her coat tighter around her as she stepped outside. The crisp air carried the smell of rain from the night before. As she walked down the block, she noticed something strange. Someone sitting in a parked car across the street, engine running. The windows were tinted, so she couldn't see who was inside. But the car's headlights flicked on briefly when she stepped outside. Her steps faltered. Was it coincidence? Or something else? She looked away quickly and kept walking. She didn't want her mother to worry, and she didn't want to feed her own fear. But the prickle across her skin didn't fade. When she arrived at Caldwell Tower, a security guard she'd never seen before was stationed near the private elevators. He watched her for a moment, then nodded respectfully, as if he'd been told who she was. That alone unsettled her more. Inside the conference room, the energy was different from the day before. Tenser, tighter, the kind of tension that builds before a storm breaks. Lawyers reviewed documents with grim expressions. Analysts whispered urgently. Ethan stood near the window, arms crossed, gaze distant, but locked in thought. When Jasmine entered, he turned. "Good morning," he said, though he didn't look like anyone who'd had one. "We have a situation." He gestured toward a stack of notifications on the table. "The Financial Oversight Committee received an anonymous tip last night. Someone leaked that we're conducting an internal review." Jasmine's breath caught. "Leaked? Who would—" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her mind immediately drifted to Lucas. "They're opening a formal inquiry," Ethan continued, "and they want testimony, yours included." The room spun slightly. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "Your perspective is necessary now. You saw patterns no one else did. They'll want to hear from you directly." Jasmine swallowed hard. The room felt too warm suddenly, too bright. "I don't know if I can—" "You can," Ethan said gently, "and you won't be alone." She nodded slowly, but fear coiled in her stomach. The storm had finally reached them. Outside the window, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. But Jasmine knew better. Everything had changed, and it was only beginning. 3 days later, Jasmine found herself sitting in the back seat of a black sedan with government plates, watching Washington, D.C. rise ahead like a city carved from stone and steel. The air outside was colder here, the kind that nipped at exposed skin and made every breath visible. She held her coat tightly around her, fingers curling into the fabric as nerves prickled through her stomach. She had never imagined she would be brought to the Capitol for anything, much less to testify before a room full of powerful people whose decisions affected entire industries. She was a waitress, someone who wiped tables and poured coffee and learned to move quietly in rooms where her presence barely registered. But today, she wasn't invisible. Ethan had flown in separately. He'd offered to have her travel with him, but she'd declined gently. She needed space to gather her thoughts, to remember who she was before all this began. A woman whose mother taught her kindness before anything else. A woman who found truth in numbers even when life didn't add up. A woman who refused to shrink. The car slowed as it approached a secure building. White stone, wide steps, massive columns. Reporters lined the sidewalk, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Security officers guided the car through the inner gate. Jasmine's heart thudded against her ribs. When the car door opened, she stepped out carefully, gripping her small bag. Her breath puffed into the air in a soft cloud. A security escort approached her. "Miss Carter?" he asked. She nodded. "This way, please." Inside, the halls were wide and quiet, lit by rows of soft yellow lights that cast long shadows on the marble floors. Her footsteps echoed lightly as she followed the officer toward a set of double doors. When they opened, she froze. The room was enormous. Tiered seating filled with committee members and advisors, a long table in the center, microphones lining its edge. At the far end, under a spotlight that made the air shimmer faintly, stood a single chair, her chair. Ethan was already inside, seated with his legal team. He turned when he saw her, giving her a small, steady nod. His expression held gratitude and guilt, as if he wished he could shield her from all of this. Jasmine inhaled slowly, then stepped forward. Every eye followed her as she walked to the witness seat. She smoothed her skirt, sat upright, and tried not to stare at the cameras positioned along the back wall. Her palms felt damp, She pressed them lightly against her knees. The committee chair, a silver-haired woman with wire-framed glasses, leaned forward. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "thank you for coming on such short notice. We understand this is unusual for someone in your position." Jasmine swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Before we begin your statement," the chair continued, "I want to make something clear. Your testimony today is crucial. You were among the first to identify irregularities in Caldwell Industries' financial filings. Without your observation, this inquiry might not have happened." Jasmine felt her breath hitch. She lowered her eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of what she'd done. She had not meant to expose anything. She had only meant to speak truth. "Now," the chair said softly, "please tell us what you saw." The spotlight warmed Jasmine's face. She lifted her gaze and began to speak. "At the time I was delivering coffee," she said. "I wasn't supposed to read the documents. I was just walking by. But I saw numbers that didn't match, deadlines that were wrong, expenses that shouldn't have existed." She paused, feeling her heartbeat steady as she continued. "I studied accounting before I had to leave school to care for my mother. I still remember patterns. I still know when something isn't right. And when I looked at those numbers, everything inside me told me something was wrong." The room stayed still, too still. Even the cameras seemed to quiet. She continued, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't speak up to cause trouble. I didn't speak up because I wanted to be heard. I spoke because the truth was wrong. Someone changed those numbers. Someone wanted Caldwell Industries to fall." A murmur rippled through the lower seating. One councilman cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, in your professional opinion—" "I'm not a professional," she said gently. "I'm just someone who can read what's in front of me." The room softened. Even the chair smiled faintly. "And what you read revealed wrongdoing," the chair said. Jasmine nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The chair leaned back. "Miss Carter, do you understand you may have saved thousands of jobs by speaking up?" Jasmine blinked, stunned by the magnitude. I wasn't thinking about that," she whispered. "Sometimes," the chair said, "the people who change the world aren't the ones trying to. They're the ones who refuse to look away." Jasmine's throat tightened. Behind her, Ethan bowed his head slightly, his eyes glassy with emotion. The questioning continued, about the vendor discrepancies, the suspicious depreciation schedules, the financial anomalies. Jasmine answered each calmly, truthfully, not with the confidence of someone trained for such a moment, but with the sincerity of someone who had nothing to hide. When her testimony concluded, the room fell into a long silence. Finally, the chair stood. "Miss Carter," she said, "you have been brave, and your insight has been invaluable. You may step down." Jasmine rose, legs trembling slightly as she walked back toward the seats. She felt Ethan's hand briefly touch her arm in quiet gratitude before she sat behind him. The committee recessed soon after, murmurs filling the large chamber. Outside, when Jasmine finally stepped through the building's heavy doors, the cold air rushed into her lungs. Reporters shouted questions, flashes burst like fireflies. Microphones stretched toward her, but security guided her through swiftly. And for one breathless moment, she stopped at the top of the steps. She looked out over Washington, the monuments, the traffic, the crowds below. She had come here as a waitress. She was leaving as the woman whose voice had changed everything. But she didn't feel triumphant. She felt the quiet stillness before the next wave. Because someone had caused this. Someone who now knew she had exposed them. And the storm was still growing. By the time Jasmine returned to New York, the city felt different, colder, sharper, as though every window and billboard was watching her. As she stepped through the revolving doors of Caldwell Tower the next morning, conversations around the lobby quieted. Faces turned. Some held curiosity. Some held disbelief. A few held resentment. They all knew. She had stood before the committee. She had spoken aloud what so many had chosen to ignore, and the truth she revealed had torn through the heart of Caldwell Industries. Ethan met her in the executive hallway, his usually composed expression softened by exhaustion and something else. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude so deep, it looked almost painful. "They've called an emergency session," he said quietly. "The committee reviewed the findings overnight. They're announcing the verdict within the hour." Jasmine nodded, though her stomach tightened. She had been strong in Washington. She had spoken with clarity and conviction. But now, waiting for judgment, waiting for someone else's decision to determine not just Ethan's fate but the fate of thousands, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. They walked together toward the conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out across the horizon, cold winter light turning the skyscrapers silver. Jasmine took a slow breath. Inside the room, the board members sat stiffly, their expressions wary. Lawyers checked their watches. Assistants whispered updates. The tension was heavy enough to feel in the air, like static before a lightning strike. A large monitor flickered to life at the front of the room. The seal of the Financial Oversight Committee appeared. Everyone straightened. A woman's voice came through the speakers, firm, clear, unmistakably official. "This hearing concerns Caldwell Industries and the financial misconduct brought to light during our recent inquiry." Jasmine gripped the edge of her chair. Ethan remained standing, his gaze fixed on the screen. "After reviewing all testimony," the voice continued, "including the critical insights provided by Miss Jasmine Carter," the room shifted, not dramatically, but as though an unseen current passed through it. "The committee has concluded that the bankruptcy petition filed by Caldwell Industries was based on materially misleading data." A gasp broke somewhere behind Jasmine. Jasmine exhaled sharply, a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "In addition," the voice said, its tone darkening, "the committee has referred CFO Lucas Hargrove to federal investigators for review of potential criminal misconduct." A ripple of shock spread across the room. One board member dropped a pen. Another closed their eyes in relief. The lawyers exchanged stunned glances. But Jasmine didn't move. She felt the weight of the announcement settle over her, not heavy but real, solid, like truth finding a place to rest. The call ended. Silence hung in the room for a long moment. Then Ethan turned. He didn't smile. He didn't rush. He simply stepped toward Jasmine and lowered himself into the chair beside her, elbows on his knees, head bowed for a second, as though gathering his breath. When he looked up, his eyes were damp. "You saved us," he said softly. Jasmine shook her head. "No, You spoke," Ethan whispered, "when no one else did, when everyone else was too comfortable, too afraid, or too proud." He stood abruptly. "I need a moment," he said to the room, then gestured for Jasmine to follow him. They walked out of the conference room, down the hallway, and into a small, quiet terrace overlooking the city. Cold wind swept across the stone floor, carrying the distant hum of traffic from far below. Snowflakes drifted slowly in the air. Ethan turned to her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, voice thick. "My family's legacy, the company thousands depend on, everything would have ended today." "You don't have to thank me," Jasmine replied gently. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ethan said firmly. "They wouldn't have. That's the difference." He stepped closer, his breath fogging lightly in the winter air. "And I don't want this to be where your part of the story ends," he said. "Not after everything you've done." He took a small step back, as though giving the moment space. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "I have a proposal for you, one that could change your future." Her heart stuttered. A gust of wind blew across the terrace, tugging at her coat. "What kind of proposal?" she asked softly. Ethan drew in a slow breath. "One that begins with this," he said. "You don't belong carrying trays in a cafe. You belong in rooms where your voice matters. And I'd like to help you get there." Jasmine stared at him, stunned. She could feel the world tilting again. Just slightly. Just enough to make the air seem different. "But only," Ethan added gently, "if it's what you want." She opened her mouth, but no words came. For a long heartbeat, they stood in the drifting snow, suspended between the life she had come from and the life she could be stepping into. And somewhere deep inside her, a door she had kept closed for years, out of fear, out of habit, out of believing she wasn't allowed to dream, began to open. The future was changing, rapidly. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She lifted her chin slightly. "What's the proposal?" she asked at last. Ethan smiled, softly, gratefully, like someone offering hope with both hands. "Let me show you," he said, "and let me promise you this. Your life is about to look nothing like where it began." The snow fell quietly around them, as though the city itself were listening. And Jasmine felt, for the first time in years, that her story was finally turning toward light. But she had no idea just how bright that light would become. Later that evening, after she'd returned home to Brooklyn, Jasmine sat with her mother at their small kitchen table. A pot of warm tea steamed between them. The apartment looked exactly as it always had. Chipped cabinet corners, a flickering light above the sink, the soft hum of the heater trying its best on a winter night. But everything felt different. Her mother watched her closely, her eyes soft and searching. "Baby, you got that look," she said gently. "The kind you used to get when something big was coming." Jasmine let out a breathy laugh. "Mom, something big did come." She told her everything. Ethan's gratitude, the committee's ruling, Lucas's investigation, the offer Ethan hinted at but hadn't yet explained. Her mother listened in silence, nodding slowly. When Jasmine finished, she reached out and cupped her daughter's hand. "You did right," she whispered. "Even when you were scared. Even when people tried to make you feel small." Jasmine felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to lose myself in all this, Mom." "You won't," her mother said. "You've already lived in the hard. Now you get to live in the honest." The next morning, a car waited for Jasmine outside the apartment building. Same sedan, same driver. But this time, she felt no tremble in her hands, no uncertainty whispering at her back. Only curiosity, and an odd sense of calm. When she arrived at Caldwell Tower, Ethan was waiting in the lobby, not in a suit today, but in a simple wool coat, scarf loose around his neck. He looked lighter somehow, as though truth had peeled a weight off his shoulders. "Come on," he said with a small smile. "I want to show you something." They rode the elevator up, not to the 78th floor meeting room where the story began, but to the 80th floor, a section Jasmine had never been allowed near. When the doors opened, sunlight flooded in like a warm tidal wave. A whole department, modern, quiet, filled with glass screens and rows of analysts, stretched before them. But one room stood out. A corner office with a view that made Manhattan look like a living map. Ethan gestured for her to step inside. "This," he said softly, "is where the Audit and Ethics Division will operate from now on. A new part of the company, one that reports independently to the board." She turned slowly, taking it all in. "And," Ethan continued, "it needs someone to help build it. Someone who sees what others miss. Someone who doesn't let titles blind them to truth." Jasmine blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you," he said, "if you want it." She stared at him, stunned. "Ethan, I'm not finished with school. I don't have a degree yet. I'm capable, he interrupted gently. And you'll finish school. That's part of the offer. He opened a folder and handed it to her. Inside was a letter. Formal, beautifully typed. A full scholarship to complete her accounting degree. Books, tuition, living costs, everything covered. And beneath it, a job offer for a paid official position at Caldwell Industries. Flexible hours to match her class schedule. Title: Junior Audit Consultant, with a clear pathway upward. Her breath caught. She'd dreamed of finishing school once, before her mother's illness, before the bills piled up, before she learned how many dreams ended quietly when survival took priority. She had never imagined that dream returning. Never imagined it returning like this. Why? She whispered. Why me? Because, Ethan said, the world needs people like you in the rooms where decisions are made. And because nobody should be punished for being overlooked, you turned that into strength. Tears slipped down Jasmine's cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her mouth briefly, overwhelmed. Ethan stepped back, giving her space. There's no pressure. If this doesn't feel right, it feels right, she said instantly, voice trembling with certainty. It feels like the first step I was always meant to take. She signed the acceptance with hands that no longer shook. By noon, she walked through the office as employees, some who once whispered behind her back, now stood to greet her, nodding with respect. Not because she'd become powerful, but because she had become visible. Fully, undeniably visible. When she reached her new desk by the window, she paused. Outside, the winter sun glinted off distant buildings, making the whole city shimmer like a promise. A promise she had earned. That evening, as Jasmine left the tower, she saw something unexpected outside the entrance. A group of interns clustered together, talking excitedly. One of them, a young woman with a worn notebook and tired eyes, stepped toward Jasmine. Miss Carter, she asked shyly. I just wanted to say, your testimony inspired me, made me feel like maybe people like us have a chance. Jasmine smiled, gentle and warm. We don't just have a chance, she said. We have a place. The young woman's face lit up. As Jasmine walked toward the street, the wind brushing softly against her coat, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not fear, not doubt, not the weight of being overlooked, but peace. The kind that comes when a life finally aligns with its own truth. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just the woman who noticed a number. She wasn't just the voice that saved a billionaire from signing his future away. She was someone who had chosen courage when silence felt safer. Someone who refused to turn away from what was wrong. Someone who had changed the course of thousands of lives simply by paying attention. And as she stepped into the evening light, her mother's words echoed softly. You've become someone people see. Jasmine lifted her face toward the sky, breathing in the cold air, letting the moment wash over her. Because sometimes, the person who ends up changing the world is the one the world never expected to notice. And now it finally had. For good. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Your voice might inspire someone else to speak their truth. Before you scroll, drop a simple 1 in the comments if you felt even one moment of this story. Or type 0 if you just want more stories like this on your feed. Your comment, no matter how small, helps this community grow. And if you want to be here for the next powerful human story, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. I promise, there's another life-changing story coming soon. Don't miss it.